This is the final episode in our 3-part mini-series on demand. And today we're going to be focusing on everything that we did post-demand when it came to content. Spoiler alert, we didn't just publish all the recordings and send a single email out so everyone could watch them. This is going to be a masterclass on how you can repurpose and distribute content coming out of your event. Demand Gen U is officially in session. Let's do it. No Jason this week, but lucky for you guys, you're going to meet the brains behind this whole post-demand content operation. And I promise you're going to be seeing more from him in future Demand Gen U episodes. So pumped to have you here today, Justin.
Absolutely. Yeah, pumped to be here.
So let's, before we jump into this masterclass, and I know that you just put out a course on a lot of this, so I have no shame in plugging your course too. Let's talk through just how we approached this, because I think it's worth reminding people that maybe didn't catch the last 2 episodes in this little mini series of the focus of the event and why that mattered when it came to content.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing too, so I came in midway into the event. So you guys had already had, I think, 90% of the speakers lined up. You guys had, a lot
it was
of
still chaos.
A lot of the topics planned out, but there was a lot already there. So I came in and I think it probably was like almost 60 days probably to the dot of when I started to when demand was going to launch. And so it was like, hop in. All right, we're ready to go here. This is what we've got. But for me, a lot of the core of it was just figuring out what we had. But I had just come off of working on and producing a podcast, which you guys didn't have when I joined. And so, but I was already in that mindset of like running a show and kind of how we cut that up and what that looked like. And the more that I started looking through demand and looking at the sessions and trying to understand what we had, the more it just felt like a show to me, and more it felt like a podcast, even more so than like individual sessions that just get pumped out once. And that's when I had the hairbrand idea, and I came to you and I was like, hey, like what if we didn't do what everybody else did, and what if we try to drip this out? What would that look like?
So perfect segue. What does everybody else do, and why did we not do that?
Well, yeah, I think most people, like you alluded to at the beginning, most people just have their event, and that's it. That's the pillar. That's the thing. All the lead up, which we did too. I mean, you do want people to attend. But I think for me, as I was kind of like looking through all of what we had, it was like, man, if we don't do anything with this, we're really selling ourselves short. We spent a ton of time, effort, money promoting the event, getting the speakers, doing all that sort of thing. And so for me, it was like, okay, if we have all these like awesome like A-list speakers, up and coming speakers, and we don't do anything with that content, like we're really, really selling ourselves short. And I think what a lot of people do is they have the event is done, they get the recordings, and they just throw them on the landing page where they had the event registration and never look at it again until next year. And that's what happens.
So there's 2 things that I want to call out just to set context, and they're kind of funny, but they're also very true. While we were doing this, we were a 3 full-time marketer team. We have a little bit of help with agencies. I tell you that not for a sob story, but to tell you that everything else that you'll learn from this episode, you can do on a small team, and I think it's a huge advantage for small teams because it helps you punch above your weight class. And then the second part, which I know Justin will get a kick out of, we were talking about this when we were preparing for this. The content has to be good, and the event that you are putting on cannot just be about you, your company, whatever you're selling. If that's the focus of the event, which demand was not, then no one's really going to care when you try to repurpose your event into a million different pieces of legit content.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like whenever you're thinking about repurposing content, you have to think through the core piece of that content. It has to be good, because if your core piece of content is a turd and you cut that up into 100 turds, you just have 100 turds. It's not actually helping your audience. And so if you get to that point where it's like if you have an event but you focus all on yourself, and then you cut up that content and you distribute it out to the world, you just have a bunch of content that's all about you. It's not actually helping your audience get better and grow and get better at their jobs.
I can't wait to turn the turd comment into a social clip. I love that. So
Done.
Let's get into maybe not just the topics, but how these sessions themselves were structured, because I think that lended itself well to repurpose it. So why don't you run us through kind of how we set those up?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was a lesson takeaway that I had too. So like I said, I came at it like most of that stuff was already prepared. So I didn't really have, hey, we should set up our sessions this way so we can cut this content afterward like this. But what I will say is we got lucky because a lot of how we did end up structuring them lent themselves to be cut up. So for instance, using a lot of panels and Q&As allowed us to take each individual question that might get answered by 3 experts, and you can cut out that exact question, paste it over into a YouTube video, and now you have 3 experts in the field answering that exact question. And so it just frames itself up to be repurposed in that way. And not all of them were cut up that way, so we did a nice mix of like panels, but then we also had some really like in-depth how-to content. And so we made the decision when we started cutting that up, like we weren't going to cut up and distribute the how-to content. I think a lesson learned is like after I watched them and after we actually like saw the success of those, I think that might have been a bad decision. I think we actually could have cut up that content and split
Next
it up
year.
because there was a lot of there was a lot of valuable pieces to be added, even if it was a how-to versus a panel.
All I heard was we got lucky and guessed correctly. I'm kidding, but
Hey, that happens all the time.
I love it. And then the other thing that I want to talk through before we start to jump into some of the immediate stuff that followed was lead time. So because of the fact that we recorded, I want to say maybe a little more than half of the sessions, or about half, we did get a decent amount of lead time to start working on that. So run through that real quick.
Yeah, I think that was honestly part of the key in all of this was the fact that we did have some of the sessions pre-recorded, because that allowed me to get a jump on with our agencies and get a jump on even just honestly the time it takes to like watch the sessions over and over. Like by the time demand actually hit, like I could probably repeat verbatim half the sessions that were on there because I'd watched them so much to like figure out what the best parts were. But that helped give us a lot of lead time to be able to get that stuff cut. So literally it was Friday we had demand, and on Monday we started dropping content. And the only reason we were able to do that is because we were able to pre-record some of that stuff and be able to load it up and get it cut and be all ready. And I think there's something to be said there for like tapping into the momentum that's there. That was the other thing that I know we had talked about specifically, was like trying to like keep the momentum going, because a lot of times you like everything is pushing toward this one event, you have it, and then it's like a decompress and it's like done and over. And what I want to do is instead like keep pushing the that rock up the hill and say like we've got more momentum here, there's more stuff we can use. And so how can we do that? Even if you wait a week, like it dies down, like the momentum sort of goes away. So it was like I want to be ready as soon as that next week hits to be able to drop new stuff.
Yeah, and I think we even lucked out a little bit, because since we had that lead time, we were able to post many of those clips the day of the event on social too. So that was awesome to see in itself. Like that was
Yep.
I'm sure it wasn't an accident for you, but I was like, oh wow, this is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Is we actually, because we had pre-recorded some of the sessions, I was able to get those cut and then work with our social media manager to get those posted throughout the day and try to drive some demand for demand, essentially. Like, not that anybody necessarily was going to like sign up or the day of and attend like in the middle of the day when they're busy working, but just to sort of say like, oh man, there's a lot going on at Metadata today. What is this? Just trying to generate some more buzz.
So we've got a lot to cover. This may even be a follow-up episode on repurposing content, because we want to include a framework that you can steal and we want you to steal from us. But before we get to that framework, we want to talk about a few of the, I would just say, hiccups that we had, because it is not all rainbows and unicorns and whatever the saying is. I'm almost 100% sure that's not it, with the event, because we had an original plan, which we thought was a good plan. We pivoted, thankfully, and I think it turned out much better than what the original plan was, but we almost could have screwed ourselves pretty big coming out of the gate. So I'll let you explain what that plan was originally, but I think what we were trying to do is we wanted to make sure that the content was available as quickly as possible post-event, but we didn't want to make people wait and sit on it. So why don't you run through what our kind of Netflix-style plan was? And how we corrected it?
So yeah, I think sometimes when you're trying to like do something new or do something different, it can lend to like swinging the pendulum, in the complete opposite direction. That's just kind of the nature's law there, right? Like, we're not going to do this, so we're not going to just push it out on a page, so maybe we don't have a page at all afterward that doesn't, house all the content. We're just going to drip it all out after. And that was the initial setup, and the initial plan was, we've got 11 or 12 sessions for 11 or 12 weeks after demand. Like, we're going to take each session and drop one a week, and we're going to plan that out, and we're going to do it, and it's going to be awesome. That was the initial setup. What ended up happening, though, was, one, we had sort of a recording snafu during the day of. If you guys want to hear more about that, listen to the last episode. But
I'm standing in the room where that happened, and I'm looking at the window that I almost wanted to jump out of.
He's having flashbacks. But so that was one thing, was like, okay, we did have a snafu, a hiccup in terms of the people who were live and not being able to access all of them being able to access the recording. So we have to at least be able to get them this one session. But then there was just a lot of, after the event was over, there was just a lot of people like, hey, because people are conditioned to get all the content afterward, there were people who attended or registered rightfully who wanted the content. And so it was like, oh, shoot, we need to think through this, and we need to be able to make sure we're actually able to give them the content, but also keep our plan in place. And I think that's what we probably worked through.
Because, if you think about it from the attendees' perspective, that was a full day event. And as B2B marketers, we all have a million things that we're doing on a daily basis. And to ask, many people who we don't even know to give up a full workday to attend this, to get the content, like, that's a big ask. So what we did was we sent the plan out to a few of our customer advisory board members and said, this is what we're thinking. What are your thoughts on this? And I think it was across the board. All of them said, I get why you would do this, but it's probably not the best way to go about it. And we pivoted. So I'd say running things like this past our cab, which we do regularly, saved us because we could have got this wrong, and I think pissed a lot of people off in the process.
Yeah, I think the other thing too, in hindsight, that I figured out as well, was like, we had 2 tracks, so we had 2 completely different sessions going at any given time throughout the day as well, and so it's nobody's fault that they attended one and not the other, and they would want to get that content versus, like, in some cases having to wait till January, like a couple months to like see it. So so yeah, we thought through that. But I mean, do you want me to get into like how we pivoted and what that looked like?
Yeah, it's like you almost read the outline we have for the episode.
Yeah, that's right. I can do my homework. So yeah, I think I mean, it was actually it was like a mad dash, because all of this stuff is just condensed down and compressed down into a time frame. I mean, we were probably a week out, maybe even less, in terms of like, how are we going to get all these sessions out at that time. And so it was like within a day or two, we tag teamed, got together, figured out how are we going to host the videos, where we're going to host them, how do we keep them locked down, what do we do, how do we make sure only people who attend get the link, how do all of those types of things. And so what we ended up doing is actually creating a separate page on our site and then locking that down with a password, and then hosting all of the stuff on Vimeo so it could be available but not live and searchable and stuff like that. But that was definitely a learning experience.
And I think for those that didn't see it, it did not look pretty. I think it was for sure good enough, but this wasn't some pixel perfect like section of the site. I don't think we cared, though, because it was the speed of getting the recordings out to the people who wanted them. Not a single person mentioned how well the page looked, and I think there's something to be said about that. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as you can just get things out the door, the better. And I think, to your point, we learned a bunch there, and we'll definitely have a solid plan well ahead of Demand 2022.
Yeah, I think that that's funny too. Sometimes we can get in our heads because the opposite probably happened for the actual demand content hub. We put a ton of effort into getting that thing right before, and we put a ton of testing and getting everything set up and making sure it looked good. And so, yeah, it's not that it looked bad. And actually, we lucked out because we already had all of the thumbnails created because we needed them for the other one. So we could get some cohesive stuff done on the page. So again, it didn't look like super thrown together, but it was. But to your point, the audience didn't care. I didn't hear anything about what the page looked like, or I couldn't, because at the end of the day, what people wanted was just to access the recordings in whatever way possible, right? They really wanted to see, Dave Gearhart's keynote, or they wanted to see Jason's such. Like, okay, cool. They have access to that. I'm good.
Yep, for sure. All right, so let's get into the meat of this. I want to get to your framework. So I'm going to take a back seat here because you're the brains behind this operation, but walk me through this.
Yeah, so I threw together, it's just a basic framework, a basic few key ideas that you can use as you're thinking about not only repurposing an event. You can think these work for other things as well, but these are kind of the lessons that I learned when I had to repurpose, a massive all-day event into months worth of content. So I'll kind of run through, there's 5 key areas here that I can kind of walk through for everybody. So the first one is planning everything ahead of time. And basically what you need to think about is every one of those sort of who, what, when, where, why questions. You want to think through those in terms of who's your audience. And again, this is the learning. I didn't have the benefit of being there when we planned it out, but again, I got lucky. Like, we had such good speakers, we had such good,
Let me interrupt. This was Justin's second month of being at Metadata, like I think almost to the day. So Justin had not been here for quite some time. So when you talk about throwing somebody to the wolves, like, this is a perfect example. All right.
Yeah, totally. But I think part of it too is like, yeah, we had really good content. If I would have gotten thrown at another company with another event, like, that's not maybe exactly what's going to happen. So, I feel lucky in that case. But understanding who you're targeting, then what do you want out of that repurposed content? So you've got this video or session. What do you want out of it? Like, are you doing YouTube? Are you doing LinkedIn? Are you posting it on your website? Like, do you want to turn it into do you just want a transcript? So figuring out what you want. And then when. And I think that's the biggest piece for the planning piece of it is the when. So then you start to plan that out. So literally, I can't remember what week it was, but I remember Mark was like, hey, I really want like a content calendar. Like, I want to see, like, it's something we're missing. Like, what do we have? Like, what do we have coming? So I took all of the demand stuff. So everything that was going to go on our website, everything that was going to go on YouTube, everything that was going to go on LinkedIn, and it all got put on a calendar and Asana and mapped out. So we knew in probably early October exactly what video was going to drop January 4th. Like, that's how planned out this was. And what that does is after the event, like, as a content person, it was awesome because for me, I had put in the work, the prep work, the figuring out when we wanted to drop that. And I could just kind of sit back and then just as the pieces came in, publish them out and get them out and get them rolling and then plan on what's going to come next, which for us was this podcast, ironically enough. Like, I had enough of a content engine built out for off of demand that I could take my full focus and pivot it over to this podcast and start prepping for that and getting that rolling. So planning is massive. Like, that's why I put it number 1, like, plan out what you want. And it leads perfectly into number 2, which is pick your distribution channels. And I touched on it, but like, really figure out where you want your stuff to go. Because I think part of the problem when you're redistributing anything, but especially with video content, is like the default is to put it on YouTube. That might not work. I think that I'll talk about that in some of the lessons we learned, but like, YouTube might not work for you. Do you have a YouTube channel? Or are you active on YouTube? Does it even make sense for your business? Are you going to, some people might even try to just take the YouTube video and then just put that directly on LinkedIn or put that, that doesn't work. So, figure out what you want to do. And for us, what we ended up deciding was we were going to go on YouTube. That was a place we wanted to go. We were getting a little bit of traction there. And so we just wanted to use demand as sort of a springboard to be able to do that. We also did LinkedIn. That's where most of our focus is for social and distribution, is organic LinkedIn. So we crushed that. And then the third one, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, Mark, is email. and what we did with email and how, we kind of revamped our email program through demand.
I think revived or brought back from the dead is a better way of saying that. You're too nice. But we, up until Justin joining, we were a team of 2 full-time marketers. So you can imagine what that was like, and it was probably a little bit crazier than what you're imagining right now. We started to do email in early 2021 and got some really good feedback on the types of emails that we were sending out. We then went radio silent as we redid our messaging, our positioning, the website, and people didn't really hear from us at all. So we knew, and Justin and I have nerded out over this at length, we knew that we needed to not only get email back up and running again, but also send really, really good emails. Email's a channel that we want to own. So what we did was each week coming out of demand, whichever new episode or recording that we were going to be releasing, we would send a really good email out every Tuesday like clockwork, and we set that expectation that it was coming from me. You could, already anticipate what was going to be in there. You had the link to the recording. You had a really solid summary of what was in there, and people were responding to those emails. I've never seen anything like that in my life, so I was blown away by that.
Yeah, it was awesome too. I think that was one of the main drivers. I actually know for sure it was one of the main drivers of getting traction for that content, because we would share it on social, we'd get some interaction, and when we do stuff on social, it's not necessarily to get people to the site anyway. But whenever we'd send an email, page hits spike, video views spike, all of that, right? Because we had an engaged audience who said they wanted this content, and now we're just dripping it out every single week. And granted, that, like Mark said, the email content's solid and people actually did respond to it, but it was awesome. I waited for those emails so I could check the stats, because the email would go and I could see all the stats spike. So,
I love it.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely figure out what your distribution channels are. If you're not using email, maybe try that. It worked out really well for us to be able to give us basically an excuse to email our audience and give them helpful content every single week. So that was awesome. 3, reverse engineer what you want. That is so you've got your channels, you understand where you want to go. Maybe you say, okay, I want to go LinkedIn. That defines what you then want out of that. So if you're thinking LinkedIn, then you probably don't need 10-minute video cuts. You might want a minute to 30-second video cuts. So okay, that narrows down your focus there. So now you're looking for that. And then I mentioned it earlier, but this is where the hard work comes in, because once you know what you want, then you have to go through and actually watch the content, or pay somebody to watch the content and figure out what the best parts are. And that's a tip too that I would say is I've been on both sides of that. I have done recorded content, and I've paid somebody, an outside agency, to decide what the titles were that were going to go in the clips, decide which clips to pull, decide what the text goes with the clips. And for demand, I did the exact opposite. I did all the hard work of writing out all of the titles that go with every social clip we post, and figuring out what the timestamps are and what we needed cut, and what are the titles for the YouTube videos, and how does that tie in with the content that we decide to pull. So there's some nitty-gritty work there that you need to figure out.
I honestly think that was one of the biggest, if you were to look back in hindsight, that was one of the biggest factors in terms of what made this so successful, was that the content stuck out for all the right reasons, because we did not outsource that.
Yeah, and again, I think once you know what you want, it sets you up for a framework. So, to kind of pull the curtain behind even more, I just threw a doc together and I said, okay, can I get 3 YouTube videos out of this? And I would go through the content, and sometimes it was yes, sometimes it was 5, I think you have to be flexible when you're doing that, but set the expectation of okay, this session has 3 really good questions and answers that this panel goes through. Those are probably a starting point to be able to cut into YouTube videos. So I would just watch the video clip, get the timestamps, put it in a Google Doc, and I would do that for all the YouTube ones. And then for social, it was funny, the first one, I think I pulled 17 videos for social, because it was just gold. There was more and more stuff coming out of it. I'm this fits our audience. It's the perfect topic. So many opinions. if you have a really
Yep.
strong opinion, like that's money, grab that quote. But then other ones, there might have been like 3 or some of it was like, this doesn't, so I think being flexible in terms of that, like my goal was 3 YouTube clips and 5 social videos out of each session. That was the goal. Some were more, some were less. But at least I had an idea and a starting point to go. Because I think otherwise it just is way too overwhelming of like, there's so much content I could pull out of here. Should I, pull 20? And it's like, not always. It doesn't matter. Yeah, you got anything, Mark?
No, I think I totally agree with that, because if you are too rigid when it comes to that, then you kind of put out mediocre content. So like if you're trying to say we have to have 10 social cuts from every single session, like some of the sessions were incredible. A lot of them were. Some of them were good. I think some of them were maybe a little too advanced, and like that was a big learning for us too. And we wouldn't have learned that unless we did this event. So I think flexibility was key, and then just knowing, hey, there are going to be specific sessions where you get a ton of gold from, and that's great. And there may be some that you thought you were going to get some gold from and you didn't get nearly as much, and that's also fun.
Yep, totally. And this one is particular to launches and particular to event launches. Number 4 is record your sessions before. We had talked about that a little bit earlier, but that is such a help to be able to get that content out and be able we'll have to, we haven't started talking about Demand 2022 yet, but like we'll have to figure out what that mix is between like recorded and live, and because I think there's something to be said for live content as well. But having some of that content be recorded was just so helpful, because then it just allowed us to drop that stuff as soon as the event was over, keep that momentum going, and be able to actually drive traffic to it. The exact same thing could be said for like a webinar. Like if you do a webinar, how fast can you get, if you pre-record it, maybe you launch it again, soon after, but how can you plan to be able to get that stuff out and be able to cut that up quicker?
So I went into this thinking that it was going to be kind of lame that we had this many recorded sessions. And I think the reason why it blew me away, and we cover it in the last episode, was the plan wasn't just to pre-record them. The plan was to pre-record them and then give you access to whoever the speaker or panelists were in the chat. So if we would have just had pre-recorded sessions and you couldn't ask questions directly to those experts in the chat, no one wants that. But because we made those people available, so you had access to ask really whatever you wanted, like I think it's that combination that really drove the experience.
Absolutely, yeah. Having it to where it's not, I don't feel like I'm just watching a video. Actually, there's another element to that. And number five, this one, it's not something that came to mind at first, but it's definitely one that, as I thought through and tried to lay this out, like what was something that I maybe didn't think of at first, it's number 5, don't skip on the details. And really what I mean by that is things like branding. So one of the things for Demand is we had awesome branding for Demand. We had a whole sub-brand built out just for an event. And so that, and especially when you're thinking about the details of repurposing video content, the more that I got into it, the more I realized, like, oh man, there's so many things we need. So we need a music track. We need maybe a video stinger to play at the beginning of our videos. We need social wrappers to be like, what does we'll make a social video. Okay, that sounds great. But then like, what does that look like? There's a lot of details that go into those things that I didn't think of at first.
You don't know how difficult it is to find good background music for videos like this until you actually have to do it and sift through the million horrendous recordings. So anyone who's done that before, how painful it is. And by focusing on details like that helps your content stand out.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing we were able to do is keep the sort of Demand brand alive, but also freshened up for the post-event experience. So we had all of our stuff for Demand. We had kind of a look and feel that was already established before I had gotten here, but then we revamped it and kind of refreshed it for all the social graphics, for things like YouTube thumbnails, which is a whole other thing that we could talk about. Like as soon as you have 20 thumbnails, then you come into the problem of like, oh crap, these all look the same. What do we do? And so like, it's all of those little details that go into repurposing your content, but being able to create something that is cohesive makes a massive difference.
So I do want to give 2 shout outs real quick on that last point. So again, we had 3 marketers, Jason, myself, and Justin, but we did have some help. Algert, our creative agency that we work with, helped out a ton, really with anything branding about demand. And then Amy Woods and Content 10X helped us out a ton. You quarterbacked the entire thing, probably won the Heisman like 5 times over, but we definitely had some very, very strong partners that helped us, put this out, and it was our first year.
Absolutely, yeah. That's an underrated thing as well, is finding good partners who you can work with to, it's a lot of the grunt work too. A lot of the stuff they both of them were able to kind of take our vision and work to kind of make that a reality to where we were able to just kind of publish it out and look good doing it too. So yeah, it was awesome.
Sweet. Let's get into questions from the class and Q&A. So first one, results. If the blogs didn't rank, did they still consistently get traffic? Did the videos keep getting views? Would be great to dig into that.
Yep. So that's maybe an interesting thing too. So when we did our site content for demand, what we ended up doing was basically summaries. And Mark and I, we had talked about that. I was like, okay, what are we going to do for like the written piece, the written content that we want? Do we want to do a blog? Do we want to do a transcript? Like, what do we want to do with that? And so what we landed on was doing kind of like a combination of things. Like, we took the summaries, we had them bust out quick little summaries of the key takeaways that we had, and then we were able to embed the video player in there and allow people to watch the session. But yes, none of them were SEO focused. So I think that's the other thing. We went into this, again, and it kind of goes back to the planning and understanding what you want in the last section, but like, understand if you're going to do a 500-word summary, it's probably not going to rank for anything. Therefore, you have to figure out a larger distribution strategy, which for us was social with all the video. Like, that's why we got all the videos cut, was to be able to push on social multiple times a week. And then we touched on a little bit, but the main driver was email. So understanding we have sort of a captive audience in our email list and being able to drive traffic. And then also the other thing too, I would say, I guess, is we did actually slowly, we're slowly been growing our YouTube channel. I'm not going to sit here and say we're hitting it out of the park on YouTube, but I was pleasantly surprised after we started consistently dropping YouTube videos that we gained subscribers and gained, a fair amount over the last few months. And again, I'm not saying we're perfect at it. We have a lot to learn there as far as YouTube goes, and put some, dedicated resource behind it. But as far as like being able to repurpose that content and get that out there, yeah, we did see consistent kind of growth in those, especially the week of.
All right, let's get into the next question. Where did you see unexpected success, and what did you learn?
So I was not expecting email to be as big a play as it did. I was expecting probably like LinkedIn, or if we put any paid behind, like trying to get this content viewed, that would be kind of our number one driver for this. But email just dominated in terms of getting traffic and engaging the audience. I think the other sort of unexpected success would be the page, like the hub itself. So when we did this, we were making it. I mean, I was making it up as I go along. Like, nobody's putting out Netflix-like experience for their event. Not that I knew of at the time, anyway. So it was like, oh no, we'll just see if this works. Like, and I'll tell you what, I was super pumped. So part of it too is just how the page and how everything came together. Like, at the end, like, we were able to put the full lineup there, so people could actually go to the page and see what was coming in the next couple weeks. Like, it was a really cool experience to be able to see all that stuff come together. And I think, honestly, like, seeing people engaged like throughout the months, that was the other thing too, is like, are people gonna even like want to, like, is this old content that people just aren't going to care about anymore? And so I think, like, part of the learnings from that is like, yeah, absolutely, like, if the topic is good and if the content is good, like, that stuff can run through.
Yeah, I think that really stuck out to me was, and I'll speak for myself, but I think a lot of marketers just assume that you always have to have, fresh new content every single time. And sure, that's true in some cases, but you're also probably not distributing it well enough, and you're assuming that everyone sees it the first time that you distribute it. So we had these sessions, since the last week of October, and we're in mid-January right now, and we just sent out the last email with one of the demand sessions, and people were just as excited about the content responding back to the email. So that was a big surprise. And then the second thing that I would share is, and it sounds so dumb to say this, but how important it was for us to be consistent on when we were sending emails and when a new session was being published every single week, because we set that expectation with people, and they knew that, hey, when Mark from Metadata sends an email on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central, that, shocker, there's going to be some good stuff in there, and you should probably open it and go check it out. I mean, our open rates were north of 50% on almost every email. Like, I've never seen that before.
And that's interesting too, because if I remember right, we were very, and this is maybe like an unspoken mantra at Metadata, but we were very forthright and open with the audience in terms of what was going to happen. So when we sent out even the initial email after demand, it was like, all right, every Tuesday we're going to send, drop a new session, and every Tuesday and Thursday we're going to drop new videos on YouTube. Now it was on us to be able to act on that, but setting that expectation, not companies aren't always that forthright with their audience to be able to know what it is. Like, I think sometimes we expect them to figure it out or learn. And so I think, and it was probably you that drove that, but I loved that, just that honesty of being able to here's the plan, here's when you're going to get content from us, here's what you can expect. Hope you join and hope you learn from it.
Yeah, it's promise something and then follow through on it. It's this revolutionary concept.
Crazy.
And then last question, were any of the repurposing plays unsuccessful? What would you have done differently?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones for me that was not what I would say is successful is some of the YouTube plays we did. And so we would drop the big YouTube video on Tuesdays, and we would get a good amount of views and a good amount of traffic because it was dripped out through email. And so people would watch the episode, watch the show, and then we would drop cuts on that Thursday, and then we would drop cuts again on Saturday. But because we don't have a massive YouTube audience, the traffic amounts on those separate videos that we were cut would be pretty low, because there was nothing, unless you were subscribed, and again, it's a super small audience, unless you're subscribed, there really wasn't any way for anybody to know those videos exist. And so I think moving forward, that's where my head's at right now, is trying to figure out, okay, we're able to drive traffic. Hopefully in the meantime, between now and the next demand, we're able to actually get some more subscribers on YouTube. That'll be helpful. But how do we continue to drive and push people over to YouTube to where we do have this good content that's dropping out 3 days a week? They just might only think it's one. So trying to figure out how to harness that in. I think that was, again, maybe not unsuccessful, but it wasn't as good as I thought, and it was definitely a key learning.
So I'll preface this by saying I am nitpicking here, and nitpicking at the smallest little things, because Justin knocked it out of the park with all of this. But one of the things that I don't think we thought about was, as we were repurposing and promoting, the sessions that were coming out, we didn't tap into giving those recordings ahead of time to the panelists or the speakers. And I remember Devin Reed reached out to me. He was like, yo, why didn't you send me these? I'll promote these for you. And I think I maybe got a little, I don't know. I didn't want to abuse their audiences because they helped us promote demand so much leading up to it. But that was something that we'll definitely do next year, and we'll give people the social clips, just because it's good for them. It's good for their personal brand. And at the end of the day, it's helping promote demand.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point to point out too. I think we were so good pre-demand working with the speakers.
We were good post-demand.
No. I'm saying just in terms of interacting with the speakers, with the people who were helping us out. And I think that is the one thing we probably laxed on, was okay, how do we help? And again, you don't want to feel like you're bugging them, or especially
bingo.
You don't want to feel like you're using these people either, but I think using them and just providing them with the stuff in case they want to use it or are interested in it. Some people actually were, like you said, Devin reached out to you. Some people were actually way more interested than others, and I would send them over the video clips, and they would, oh, thanks, awesome. because they've got 4 video clips now that they can post on social that they didn't have before.
Exactly. Justin, this was awesome. It's almost like you've done this before. We will definitely have you on plenty of more episodes of Demand Gen U. So make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.